Good day everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Mariette, also known as the Boervrou, and this video is going to be the second video in the little series about my tips for new beginner sock knitters. So if you missed part 1, I will link it for you up here and down below. And in part 1 I covered 4 things, which was why you should start by knitting for yourself, why gauge is important, why needles is important, and why it is important to make notes. So in today's video I'm going to talk mostly about yarn, only yarn I think, and I'll be showing you some different ways that your socks can look after being knit. Right, so yarn. Why is yarn important? Because I always say that double knit is not always double knit. Whatever's saying on the label is not always exactly the same as another brand of yarn. So in sock knitting it is especially important to use yarn made for socks. If you're a beginner knitter, I would really suggest using a sock yarn that's got some added nylon to it for strength, or some mulberry silk. You can of course knit socks without nylon, but you need to knit them at a different type of gauge, a very dense gauge as I understand, to give it a little bit more strength. And you can add some mulberry silk yarn to it as well, that also adds strength. But I'm not going to go into that too much because I don't really have any experience on that. I've only knitted socks for wearing in shoes with some nylon or polyamide content in them. I did knit a few pairs of socks with acrylic yarn and acrylic nylon blend and a wool and acrylic blend, but those were proper socks knit for using as bed socks. So they do get quite a bit of friction. You wouldn't think so, but sleeping gives them a little bit of friction, and the plain normal acrylic yarn socks have gotten holes underneath the heel where the heel turn is. And the one pair that I've knit with an acrylic and nylon blend is still going strong. So it seems that nylon is important in your socks, even if you just wear them in bed. But anyway, let me show you some different brands of sock yarns and what is in them and where they come from. So you get lots and lots of different sock yarns. I would say the most known brand or blend that most people use is usually a 75% wool and 25% nylon or polyamide mix. Some of them is 75% superwash yarn and some is virgin wool. But anyway, one of the brands that I really like to use is the Knotty Habit brand, and that you can see on the label is a 75% superwash merino and 25% nylon blend. So it is a very nice 3-ply yarn, and in socks even the plies are quite important, it seems. The tighter the twist, the stronger the socks, it seems. I haven't had any problem with any socks getting holes in them that I have knitted for the past few years with sock yarns with some added nylon or polyamide into them. The only socks that got holes is the plain acrylic yarn that was used for bed socks. All of the other sock pairs that I have knitted so far since I started beginning to knit socks is all still intact. But anyway, so this is a South African dyer with a South African yarn that I spoke about, and I've knit quite a few pairs with her yarn. Then this is a discontinued brand, but I also like this quite a bit. was the L sock wool, and this one is a 80% wool and 20% nylon. Now this label does not specify if it's merino or what wool it is, but it is a 4-ply, and I have to say that these yarn for socks, the 80% wool blend, does pull a little bit more, and it does looks like it fluffs up a little bit more. So I'll be showing you some socks a little bit later that I made with this yarn, and then you can see what it looks like. But anyway, as I said, this is discontinued. And I did see in Nitty Natty from the Love and Stitches podcast, she made a scrappy granny stripe blanket, and when she washed it in the washing machine, the 80% wool and 20% nylon blends that was in her blanket behaved differently to the 75% wool and 25% nylon blends that she used. They did fluff up a bit more, or got a bit more, yeah, I would say fluff up before pilling, I think. I'm not exactly sure what the process is before things start spilling, but I will show you my socks a little bit later, and it looked a little bit like that just without the pulls. But anyway, then you get lots of other different yarns. I also worked with the Esteriza Yarn Creations wool. I did use their 75% wool and 25% nylon blend, but this one is a 20% kit mohair, 25% nylon and 55% superwash wool, and it is a 4-ply sock fingering weight yarn. Very, very nice for socks. They're nice and warm. So that is another blend. Then I have worked with these before. It's more of a commercial yarn, the Regia 4-ply from Schachenmeier, and this one says it's a 25% virgin wool, 25% polyamide blend, and these have 420 meters on a 100-gram ball. I did not mention the other ones. The sock wool, the L sock wool, is approximately 200 meters on 50 grams. So there's a 20 meter difference in 100 grams. The Esteriza yarns is 440 meters for 110 grams. So that gives you also about 400 meters for 100 grams. And the Knotty Habit yarn, these ones are 366 meters on 100 grams. So a little bit of a thicker yarn, which is very nice and plump. And then I've also used the Opal yarns, which is also a commercial brand. And it also says 25% virgin wool and 75% virgin wool and 25% polyamide, and it has I don't know how many meters does it have. Oh, there it is, 425 meters on 100 grams, so that is 5 meters more than the Regia ones. And then I also have this one. This is a Rowan sock yarn. This one is a blend of 45% merino wool, 20% mohair, 25% polyamide and 10% silk. And it has also 400 meters for 100 grams. Alright, so, oh, and it says made in South Africa, so interesting. Hope you can, that focuses there. Anyway, so that is a difference of meterage over all of these yarns. So that will say that if you use these yarns, you will get a different gauge for your yarns between the stitch counts and the row gauge and so forth. So that is why in the first part of the series I said that gauge is very important and making a little gauge swatch, because even I sometimes have to make a 60 stitch sock for myself or a 64 stitch sock depending on what yarn I use, and I'm using the same size needle. So I would always, when using a new brand name of yarn, like if I've never worked with a Regia before, I would make a gauge swatch or a little gauge sock, and I have lots of them hanging around in all of my yarn. So this is more or less what they will look like. I will cast on the amount of stitches that I need for myself. I'll knit the ribbing and a piece of stocking stitch. Now usually I knit a little bit more of stocking stitch like this, but I could already see in this little bit that this sock is way too big for me, and I bound it off. I blocked it and I saw that it is about this much too big. So I think this was done in a 2.5mm needle. So I switched back to the 2.25. I was still in between deciding what needle I want to use. And then I got the correct gauge. And I think this was 64 stitches as well. And I had to go down to a 60 stitch sock even when I went down a needle size. So that is another thing that is important to keep in mind when knitting socks, that your sock size might differ between using different yarns, as well as I said in the first part, that you might be need to knit your foot size of your sock and your leg size differently. Yarn makes a big difference in what size sock you should knit. I see I still have another yarn label lying around that I did not even show, but this is another sock blend that we get here. It's the African Expressions Soul yarn, and it is a blend of 15% kit mohair, 15% mulberry silk, 50% merino wool, and 20% polyamide. And this yarn also has 200 meters on 50 grams. And I have heard that some people have a problem that this specific composition sometimes stretches a bit more after blocking. So what that means is that after they block the socks, they will grow a little bit and they'll be a little bit bigger. I didn't get that problem with my socks. I think maybe the gauge that I knitted at normally is different, because yarns and gauge and all of those things is different for everybody, because we all knit differently. But anyway, so that is the yarns that I wanted to talk about. So just to summarize that a little bit, you do get different types of sock yarn that's got nylon in them, or less or more nylon. It differs from brand to brand if you can wash them in the washing machine or not. And some brands' labels will also state that you should not use fabric conditioner or Stay Soft in the water when you wash these socks. I think I did read it on one of my yarn labels. I think it was Opal. Yes. This one says, do not use fabric softener. So if you wash your socks in the washing machine, always read the label and make sure which ones is not supposed to get fabric softener. As I've understand from talking to some dyers in the past, I have heard that the coloring in the fabric softener will also make the yarns bleed a little bit. So I'm not an expert on this subject, but I just read the labels and yes, follow the instructions. It is the best. So that is my thing on sock yarns. Always read the label, make good notes on what type of yarn you used, what was the plies, what was the composition, and make the notes for that specific sock yarn for your size, if you knit for yourself or for whomever size. And don't always just go off by, oh, I knit my socks with the opal yarn, 70 rows for my, or rounds for my foot, and then you go and take the owl sock wool, and that might change. You may get a sock that is too short or too long. So always stick to your notes for how many rounds you did for that specific yarn, because row gauge does change and your stitch gauge can also change in between using different brands. And as I said in my previous video, if the socks do not fit you, just rip them out and start again, because every time you have to rip something back, you don't start from the beginning. You start with more knowledge on what works for you and what does not work for you. Alright, and I always have these lying around, and when I use this yarn again, I will just knit from this and use it up. So let me show you some of the socks that I've made over the past, I don't know how long I've been knitting socks. So I knit, oh, and keep in mind that these socks have been worn quite a bit, so they might not look their best anymore. So this is one of the first pairs of socks that I knitted. I think it was the second pair of socks that I knit. This one was for me, and I knit it with these this sock yarn. And as you can see, I haven't worn these a ton. I think at the most 15 times, but I do wear my socks inside boots, so they do get quite a bit of friction. But this is what they look like, and you can see here that they do fluff up quite a bit, and that is the 80% wool, 20% blend. They are lovely and soft, and I have not de-pulled them yet, so they do have a little bit of belling. But I'm not talking bad about this yarn. That is not the idea here. I'm just showing you the differences of yarns with different compositions. Right, and then this yarn is, I think this is the fourth pair of socks that I've knitted. After I started, I first knit a pair for my husband in the owl, and then for me, and then I knit him a pair in the Naku boho yarns. I haven't brought the label. It's also 75% wool and 25% polyamide blend, and it was yarn from Turkey. I bought quite a few balls of it. And this is the fourth pair that I've knitted. And these socks were knit on 2.5mm bamboo needles. And I knit the cuffs in 3.25mm needles, because that's how I learned from a Afrikaans book. And then I switched to 2.5 and I knit the rest of the sock. And these have been worn a ton, like a lot. And these get washed in the washing machine, stay soft and all of the time. And they are very nice. I really, really like them. Alright, so, and as you can see, I have not de-pulled any socks. I don't even have a thing to de-pull socks with. I don't know what people use, but yes, these are some more socks. I knit about 6 or 7 pairs for me and 6 or 7 pairs for my husband before I knit my first pair of socks with hand-dyed yarn. So my first hand-dyed yarn that I ever bought, I bought from Naughty Habit, and this is the sock set that I got from her that I knit these socks from, and it is the 75% superwash wool and 25% nylon blend. So these were also knit on 2.5 still millimeters. I was holding my needles differently, and all of those things that changed my gauge, and I nowadays only knit on 2.25mm needles. But these have also been worn quite a lot, and I have felt it a little bit at the heels, but that makes it just a little bit stronger. And I've also not de-pulled these socks ever, and look how beautiful they still look. Gorgeous. These were knit toe up. I was still busy with my toe up heel flap and gusset construction that I was working out, so this was one of those pairs where I worked out all of those things. And this yarn have held up beautifully during the past 2 or 3 years. I'm not exactly sure how long it's been. Alright, and then I've also knit these. I'm sure you would have seen these before. This is the socks that I knit for the pattern, the DB toe up socks, after I've finished working out all of the things with the toe up heel flap and gusset construction. And these were knit on 2.25mm needles, and you can see there that there's not much of a difference in the sock tube moving from 2.5 to 2.25mm needles, because my gauge have changed on how I hold the needles. So this is socks was knit using the Estereza yarns, the Donna base, and they also are quite lovely. I really love these socks. They wear beautifully. I do only wash these by hand. I don't throw them in the washing machine. I don't know if it says on here. It says hand wash, so I have not ever washed this in the washing machine. I just wash them by hand, roll them up in a towel afterwards, and dry them outside, out of direct sunlight, or on some blocking mats inside the house. Right, then I've also experimented once, and I've used the Naku yarns held double, and I knit a pair of scrappy socks with all of the leftover scraps from this specific yarn color, because I think I had 5 or 6 balls of it. I still have some of it left. And then I knit this double knit sock pair of socks, and they are quite thick. I think they might be, for me specifically, maybe too warm in boots. I don't get cold that often or that much, but I have worn them once or twice on a very, very cold day, and they weren't too hot, but they are quite thick. And as I said, I've only worn them like twice, I think 2 or 3 times, so they are still very, very beautiful. And then the other ones that I brought is just for fun, so that you can see how different a sock can look if you knit it with different type of stitches. So the first pair was also knit out of opal yarns, and I tested my friend Leanie from Independence Yarn Crafts first pattern, sock pattern that she brought out in January. It was the pattern is My New Year's Socks, I think, and this is the pair of socks that I knit from that. This was knit cuff down with the heel flap and gusset construction, but look how tiny the leg looks like. It's got a tiny leg next to the stocking stitch, because the ribbing is cinching in and grabbing a hold of your leg a little bit better. But these socks are also lovely to wear, and they've got a beautiful, beautiful grip on the leg and on the foot. And then these are too funny for me. I always laugh when I look at them. These 2 yarns is exactly the same composition, and look how different they look, just because of the patterning. So this is a faux cable patterning with like a ribbing texture, and they look so funny. So sometimes when you knit socks, especially with ribbing, don't be alarmed if the socks looks very small. They will stretch out. And if you knit a little sock tube and you washed and blocked it and fitted it, you have nothing to be scared about. So I just brought these few pairs of socks to show you just for fun, to wrap up this small series. And I hope that you enjoyed it and learned something, and that you will be able to knit lots and lots of socks in the future. So that is it from me for this video. I hope that you enjoyed this little series. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see any more of my content. And I will see you in the next one. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye.